What's up? What's up? What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Bible and Brekkie, or I guess Bible and Brunch. But we're excited to be back. We got Steven and Brian back on, and so guys, how y'all doing? Doing all right?
Good.
Productive week so far? A little bit. Yeah. Well, there's been a lot going on. I mean, we kind of talked about this before we went live, and with not just with the impeachment of former President Trump, and with news of Ravi.
Ravi Zacharias, Ravi,
Ravi Zacharias, and
Rabbi,
all the things
Rabbi, according to Brian.
I thought it was Rabbi too for a bit. I was like,
just say R. Zachariah.
R. Zacharias.
Zacharias.
Nothing is right, bro. We just can't get it right.
This is Rabbi Zacharias.
Apparently, nothing was right with him either, man. So it's
Hey, I mean, it's true.
Yo, so a lot of things going on this week, in the midst of it all, and but yeah, crazy time. But we're glad to get through another week so far, and so we are going actually into Psalm 73 as we went last week. We went to Psalm 27. Was it?
Yeah.
No,
I think so.
42.
42.
Steven's like, yeah. That sounds right. Yeah. So last week we did Psalm 42. This week we're doing Psalm 73. We're gonna do in just a couple more Psalms and then jump into another book. But this is a powerful Psalm for me, one of my favorites, because it really speaks to the hearts, just like last week's Psalm did too. I think maybe the thoughts that we have, and I'm just gonna read it. Psalm 73. So if you follow along, check it out. Psalm 73 says, "Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold, for I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They have no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They are free from common human burdens. They're not plagued by human ills. Therefore, pride is their necklace. They clothe themselves with violence, for their callous hearts comes iniquity. Their evil imaginations have no limits. They scoff and they speak with malice. With arrogance, they threaten oppression. Their mouths lay claim to heaven, and their tongues take possession of the earth. Therefore, their people turn to them and drink up waters in abundance. They say, 'How would God know? Does the Most High know anything?' This is what the wicked are like, always free of care. They go on amassing wealth. Surely in vain I have kept my heart pure and have washed my hands in innocence. All day long I have been afflicted, and every morning brings new punishments. If I had spoken out like that, I would have betrayed your children when I tried to understand all this. It would trouble me deeply till I entered the sanctuary of God. Then I understood their final destiny. Surely you placed them on slippery ground. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly are they destroyed, completely swept away by terrors. They are like a dream when one awakes. When you arise, Lord, you will despise them as fantasies. When my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, I was senseless and ignorant. I was a brute beast before you. Yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will take me into glory. Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. But as for me, it is good to be near God. I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds." So a lot going on. The reason I think is one of my, I don't know if you want to say favorites, but one that really speaks to me, I think, is because of the tension and the dialogue that this author is having in his mind, right? And as he's writing, right, he begins it, surely I believe God is good to Israel, right? To those who are pure in heart, I definitely believe that God is good. But then he puts his case to say, you know what, but I've struggled because when I look around, like the way he says it, right, my feet had almost slipped and I almost lost like my footing or my foundation, because I started looking around and seeing how kind of the common thing, right? Why is it that good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people? And he's looking around and he's saying that all these other people that are arrogant, that are evil, that are mean, that are wicked, they prosper, right? They don't have struggles. They have healthy bodies, right? They're not plagued by the human ills that everyone else does. And he's kind of like saying, like, man, I almost tripped and slipped and like maybe even left my faith because I'm looking around and I just think it's not fair to see that this is happening to me. But those that don't follow God and, aren't living under the covenantal promises or whatever, they're not receiving the same ills of life and the pains of life that I am. And then he finally resolves it, right? But in that tension, I think it's very real to many, maybe the things that we go through as we're seeking every day to connect with God and stay true to him. We have that where we're like, man, life is really tough for us. And then you look at others and you realize, dang, life doesn't look as tough for them as it does for me. And I think it's a tension that a lot of us can feel, and at just face value, look at me like, man, it just doesn't seem fair, God. Like, why is it I'm busting my butt out here, working so hard to not do the things that my natural body wants to do, that my tendencies want to do, in order to, glorify you and live for you and be pure in heart. But then I look around and there just seems to be no benefit in being this way, right? It seems to be this one of the arguments that he's saying, right?
Right.
Any thoughts from you guys?
Yeah, I mean, that's just the way we do things a lot of times. Like, that's just the way we kind of see the world. Mm-hmm. And for better or worse, and more often than not, for the worse, we base everything on some standard of how everybody else is doing, right? If things are going well for them, then that must mean, I'm bad, right? I'm doing something wrong, right? That's just kind of the way we always craft it. And I do think it was interesting though how in verse 2, he says, like, but as for me, my feet had almost stumbled, my steps had nearly slipped, and he kind of talks about like nearly going off the deep end, essentially, right? Hey, I was losing it, and how a lot of people are kind of on that ledge of, when it comes to that, and that's ultimately where that leads. That's kind of the way I see it. And then obviously we can sit here and talk about how social media kind of creates that, dynamic. But I think even this obviously precedes social media. So it's not solely tied to that. It's something that is deep seated within our human flaws of always feeling like we need to do that. And we're always very close to the edge, close to saying like, man, when am I? And also within that too, I think we have this dynamic of, this belief that, if I'm faithful to God, then I'm going to have my breakthrough. I'm going to have this sort of moment of
prosperity,
bliss, prosperity when, and it's just not really who God has really portrayed himself to be. At least we want God to be that way, but that is not the God that's necessarily always communicated in the Bible, or if at all, really. And so there's just a lot within there, and just the psychology of how we approach things.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can resonate with what you're saying, Stephen, because I mean, we tend to make assumptions about people and their lives and success based on the very limited time that we actually get to interact with them, whether it be social media or 2000.
Right.
In some kind of like carriage or something. I don't know. But we're not really aware of the internal, not just struggles, but all the things that are going on within them and their house and all of that. Like, we have no idea about people's baggage, and yet
that's good.
Trey is so I guess successful to us that is like, man, I wish I had that, but you have no idea what that is. It's your perception of what you think that is. Not to get all philosophical, right? But I think that here, what I really like is that he connects himself with these guys that he's talking about, right? The what does he call them? I don't even know. Basically, with the bad guys, right?
Wicked.
Yeah, with the wicked. He connects himself with one term, and the term, I think, is arrogance, right? In one portion, the first half, he calls them arrogant, but in the second portion, he calls himself arrogant. And so when I read the where he calls them, right, the wicked, arrogant. Um, I'm trying to find the verse here.
Is it verse 3 or 8?
Yeah,
3 has,
or I
yeah.
envied the arrogant when I saw. Yeah, no, it's verse 8. They scoff and speak with malice. With arrogance, they threaten oppression. And I think what he's saying here is like with arrogance, they threaten oppression because it's like you're so arrogant, man, that you don't realize that you're already oppressing people with all you do, with all that you have. And now you're saying, oh, watch out for me because, if you don't, behave, I'm going to get you.
Right.
And it's like, what are you talking about, man? That's so arrogant because they're already oppressed by you. And yet at the same time, as he's discussing this, he reaches a point where he says, where is this?
Is it 13?
No, I think at verse 22, where he's saying like, bitter and embittered. I was senseless and ignorant. I was a brute beast before you. And I think the reason why he calls himself arrogant is because in the previous verses, he says all this stuff about how, oh, I've been so pure, and oh man, I'm not getting mine, and what the heck, God, all this for no reason. And then he describes how it is that he's been pure this whole time. And what he's saying is, I'm with you always, right? But how he describes that he's with God always has nothing to do with what he himself is doing. It's all about what God is doing. He said, you hold me as like God, you hold me right hand. You're taking me right into glory. So God is doing all the doing, right? And he's not really doing anything. He's just a wild beast. And so in a way, he's looking at these people. He's like, oh, you guys are arrogant because we're still under oppression. But at the same time, he looks inward and he's like, wow, I'm so arrogant because none of this purity, none of this goodness that I think that I'm doing or that I am is really up to me. I'm a wild beast, and God has taken hold of me. He calls me like pure and calls me holy and righteous. And at the end of the day, it's he who's going to take me into glory, and nothing that I do, whether I be rich or poor, is going to help me get there.
Yeah. I like that. It's kind of like there's a, I guess maybe, I don't know if you can distill all of life into that, but there's like two ways of living, which is like an inward focused or an outward, where inward is like, you kind of read what they're, as you were saying, right? And it's like they pride, verse 6, therefore pride is their necklace. They clothe themselves with violence, right? They make these boastful claims in verse 9. And then in verse 11, they're like, how would God know? Does the Most High know anything, right? And so then in other verses, it's more of like you were saying, right? Where he realizes his own condition inside is just as bad, if not worse than those out there. And he's like, in a way, envious of of the benefits that they get in being, I guess, evil openly. But then he realizes that even though they're doing it openly, I'm evil inwardly. And so there's like this outward focus where I think as humans, right, what sin and what selfishness is that you're just looking inward to yourself, and you get to the point where I don't care about what God does. I am, I guess, in a sense, my own God and my own leader. And here we're being told, no, that God is the one, as he says, right, who does everything. He's the one that guides, like you were saying. He's the one that is near to us. He's the one that will keep all things, hold everyone accountable at the end of time. And so, yeah, it's an interesting conversation that he's having there. I mean, for me, it just speaks volume. Verse 13, right? He's kind of talked where he's in verse 3. I envied them, right? I almost slipped. I almost lost my footing. Verse 13, he's like, surely in vain I have kept my heart pure and have washed my hands in innocence. Like he's so upset, right? It's just like why am I putting so much effort and work into whether it's these ritual purity laws or just this dedication and commitment to why am I waking up, especially our context now, why do I wake up on Saturday mornings to go watch virtual church when all these other people, why am I doing this? Why am I paying my tithe? Why am I getting involved on Sundays, waking up to go help in Pathfinders when nobody, why am I doing this when other people that don't do good things or aren't outwardly looking seem to be benefiting more when I look around? And he's like, surely in vain, all day long I have been afflicted. Every morning brings me punishment. But then he catches himself, which I thought was interesting in verse 15. He's like, if I had spoken out like that, I would have betrayed your children. And because if I would have tried to understand it, it troubled me deeply until I entered the sanctuary of God, and then I understood their final destiny. So he kind of gets it when he again goes out, as you were saying, Brian, and kind of gets that perspective of God and looks at, I guess, maybe the whole plan. I don't know if you want to say the whole great controversy and all that is happening, and he finally sees the end, and he's like, oh, I see. So yeah, in this life, they might, you know, I might not get what I want in this life, but this is not the end of the story. And but yeah, it's interesting, right? The tension we have. I mean, I feel it too sometimes, you know, where, you know, you look at, especially during COVID, you know, like we were talking about last time, I lost my dad right to COVID, and then you look around, people not wearing masks and being, you know, saying it's a hoax, and then you're like, man, but they never get sick, it seems, right? These people that don't believe it's real, or that are like purposely, intentionally saying this is a big lie, or whatever, and spreading conspiracy and rumors and all these things, theories, they don't get sick. And you're like, it just doesn't seem fair when people that are taking it seriously are getting sick and dying or being hospitalized or, you know, ending up with other health conditions, and people that don't care about others and their inward focus, right? And this kind of arrogance, right, that he's explaining, right? The arrogance and their desire to not care, you know, whatever, it's not real. And so it's easy to sit back and be like, man, this God, it just doesn't seem fair. Like, why are we trying so hard to be kind to our neighbors and love our neighbors when the very neighbors that we're trying to love and care for don't reciprocate that love? Yeah, it can be a tense dialogue in your mind as you're going through life.
Yeah. And much like you mentioned, you know, he sees the end of things, and you know, it sounds just like so like you're over spiritualizing life in a way when you say, you know, but hey, you know, he came to realize at the end that what was important was for him to be near God, right? That's the conclusion he comes to in verse 28. But as for me, it is good to be near God, is what he said. Right? And, you know, I'm going to have you as my refuge, and I'm just going to, you know, tell of your good deeds. But then you're kind of left wondering, what good deeds are you talking about?
Right.
You know, because, you know, this whole thing that you just wrote, you know, what is this guy's name? Asaf or whatever. All the thing that you just wrote, man, like there was nothing in there that made me feel like, oh wow, God's got my back. All you're saying, like, you know, this sucks and that sucks, and I guess I'm too. But at the end of the day, God, you're my refuge. And
God's got me. God's got you.
Wow, wow. I don't see how God.
That's good. That's good.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And I feel like at least the last psalm and this psalm, now that we're reading, and I don't know what psalm we're doing next, but they all kind of have this like this feeling of, man, like you're leaving me on a cliffhanger here, bro, because you just like totally skipped from, you know, how you're down, and you skipped the whole part where God, you know, actually picks you up and
lifts you up and stuff,
blesses you and does all this stuff to you or for you, and then you just end it with, you know, I'm going to tell God I'm going to tell everyone about God's good deeds. So what the heck does he mean by good deeds, I guess, is the question that comes to my mind as I'm reading this.
That's good. It kind of reminds me of like last week's, right, Psalm 42, where it seems like, you know, he's kind of like going back and forth. He's like, man, this sucks, but he's like, where's God? But he's like, all right, soul, don't why are you downcast, my soul? Trust in God, you know, you're gonna praise him again. And it's, I don't know, maybe it's this, we were talking about that last week, right? The tension, right? Where maybe in this life it won't ever get resolved. Right? We've talked about this before in the earlier Psalms, where you can be planted by the streams of water, but you can still go through maybe droughts, or you know, your leaves may fail, and but you're still going to be, you know, connected to God at the end of the day, even though things may happen to it. So maybe that's part of the tension here, where it's frustrating because you're expecting, we're kind of like the Disney ending, right, where immediately this will be resolved, and it's like kind of like the disciples when they came to Jesus, who was it, James and John, and they're like, let's just, you know, you want the immediate result. God, they rejected you. Let's just throw down fire, right? Jonah does the same thing. God, you know, God, I preached, they did turn, but I don't want, you know, I want you to burn them up. And so maybe we kind of want the same thing for our enemies or for those that we don't like. And it's like, why is it that we fight so much? You know, you think about, you know, it's Black History Month and all the 400 years of fighting against injustice and systemic racism and oppression. And then you get to, you know, Jim Crow laws, and then modern era, you know, now where we are now, where there's discriminatory laws and, you know, all the things, and you're just keep fighting and fighting. You're like, God, why can't you just burn everything up and let us start anew? And maybe that's the tension that we're just living in this time, in this world, that maybe for many people doesn't get resolved, which is just frustrating, right? Because it's like, I mean, Hebrews 11 comes to mind, where Hebrews 11, where the author is talking about the people of faith, and I just want to read it because it kind of gives me hope, but it's also at the same time in the converse, it's just frustrating because you're like, man. But Hebrews 11, after the author has gone through like great lengths to talk about what faith is and whatnot, he talks about in verse is it 11? Oh yeah, Hebrews 11 verse 13, right? So he had just talked about Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham, and then he says in verse 13, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. And people who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. But I guess, they didn't receive the things that they were promised. They saw them from afar, and yet they didn't receive all the, what the promises of the land of covenant or whatever. And so I think that's kind of the tension that we're living in here, that we want some sort of resolution sometimes in these Psalms, and it's like,
yeah,
I don't know what to tell you. But obviously, it's very spiritual answer. At the end, everything will be made right? But that sometimes doesn't really speak into our own current situation as much, because we're still in the pain and in the confusion and in the, frustration of just like, well, things haven't changed.
But I think Paul also speaks to that, to verse 28.
Yeah.
As for me, it is good to be near God, right? In chapter 10, verse 22, which is kind of like the little verses that you have there, and that tell you, hey, it talks about this and some other scripture. So I always look at those. Chapter 10 of Hebrews, verse 22 says, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from our guilty conscience and having our bodies washed with pure water. So in a way, I feel like what he's saying here towards the end is that as he comes near to God, or as God pulls him near to himself, right? What he's finding is a kind of forgiveness for the guilt of feeling like, man, I want what they have. Instead of really wanting and waiting for what you promised. And I think like that is as close to a resolution as you get in this psalm. The fact that he's like, thank you for cleansing me from that guilt and that shame comes along with looking at those who are oppressing other people and those who are just ignorant and arrogant and all this other stuff, and wanting what they have. And there's guilt and shame that comes with that, particularly us pastors. We look at our other friends that majored in something else, and we're like, dang, we messed up, but there's some kind of like guilt and shame that comes with looking at what someone else has and saying like, man, I wish I had that opportunity. Like, why wasn't that presented to me? So I like that. I like that Paul kind of touches up on that in chapter 10 of Hebrews, verse 22.
That's good. That's interesting. That kind of gets me thinking of like, maybe the emphasis here isn't for it's again like, I don't know, when you look to God and you're looking at your present situation, God's like, let me figure out and I'll when it's time, I'll fix the problems out there. But what I need you to do and what you can do today is fix your own situation, which is, as you were talking, right? Like drawing near to God, as Paul says, and then he's going to cleanse your heart and change you and give you maybe a new perspective and focus to see the world and view the world. Though it may not change, your perspective of how you're viewing it may be different, which is kind of what happens here, right? He goes to the sanctuary, he sees, I guess, maybe the rituals and the sacrifices, something clicks for him. And he's like, I understand their destiny. And even though nothing changed around him, it was just his perspective of what's going on that can be powerful. And I think it maybe, I don't know if this connects with it, but it's kind of like what John tells when Jesus is talking to Peter right after they go fishing, and he's like, feed my sheep, and then he looks at John and he's like, what about him? And he's like, don't worry about him. What I'm worried about is you, right? It's between you and me. And maybe that's the focus here in these Psalms, that though the situation and problems that we're in doesn't get resolved, what can get resolved is your connection with God. And that can be, you can be renewed, you can be changed, your heart can be made into a heart of flesh that actually feels and loves. And maybe that's why he's ending in that way, and that's okay for him, that though nothing changes, he's like, God is near to me. And at this point, that's all that matters.
Yeah. I mean, and going back to, the story with Peter, I mean, he only looks at John and says, what about him? After Jesus tells him, hey, this is going to happen, man. You're going to end up doing stuff you don't want to do. And,
they're going to kill you.
Right.
He just wants to make sure.
And then that's when Peter's like, oh, hold up. I don't like that for myself. What about this guy? What's
about
and that's just the natural inclination, I think, that we have. And another thing about the Psalms, and I guess I'm looking at this as like a song, right, per se. And, you listen to a breakup song, there's no resolution there, man. It's just like all sad and sobbing and all this other stuff. And it's just like, oh, man, you just want to, you
just want to cry. Even though you're married, you're like, why am I crying for this breakup?
Yeah, exactly. But you feel identified with the artist and what they're saying, because at some point or another, you've gone through heartbreak.
Yeah.
And, I think that is kind of like how you view songs like this, where, there's a clear, I want to say his heart is broken, but I feel like, man, that's so unfair, man. Like, we could have worked things out so differently, God. Like, why?
Yeah, it does sound like that. Yeah,
me like this, man. And I think that viewing the song that way at least helps me in a way. And these are all very like sentimental, full of emotions.
Yeah.
And this back and forth between the same person, right, just thinking these things and being able to defend God, even though he's feeling like the complete opposite.
Yeah, the way he feels. Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Yeah, this and I think that's what's kind of what we keep harping on and just talking about, is just how powerful the Bible is, and that it doesn't really sugarcoat anything, and it just talks about, hey, these are real things. And you would think, if it was a book written by a lot of, maybe, I don't know if you want to say insecure, but not as grounded, because a lot of times people look at it as questions or anger or frustration or doubt. Yeah, if you allow it to brew too much, it can lead you to, completely away from God. But there is a place and space for it. And as we see in the Psalms, it's very evident that God welcomes it, and he's not thrown out. I mean, to me, it's an evidence of a true relationship with God when you're able to have these conversations, right? If you're in a relationship or a friendship and you're not able to tackle those difficult conversations and being like, hey, when you did this, or I didn't like that, or I felt this way, or this really brought doubt to me. I think this really speaks to the closeness that Asaph or is, and all of David's Psalms too, to that connection to say, God, I don't know why this is happening, and it sucks, and that's it. That's all I got for you, God. I mean, I don't even, as he's saying, I don't feel like praising you, but I'm trying to encourage myself to do it. I don't want to go to church, but I'm encouraging myself to do it, because even though nothing's changed in my situation, I don't know, you are all I got, God. And it's like a situation I think many of us have gotten into, even as pastors, right, where we're kind of like, man, what is going on?
Yeah. And I think, like, there's this other side of it, right? Where the difference between wanting something from God and just wanting God, like how that is, when, and I think that's easy to kind of say, like, oh, we just need to want to be in the presence of God, right? But like, as Brian was saying, and as we're talking about, like, hey, like, what does that mean? What is that bringing me? Like, that's the way that we think, right? But is it just that? But how powerful is just that ability? And I think too, and even to the point of like how we disciple people, right? How we think about it. Like, we always kind of think like that there isn't oftentimes a space for that, right? That there isn't a space to kind of share and to view that as something good and something holy. Like, that ability to have this conversation with God, I think we always view it as something ugly and something bad and gross, but realizing that God wants that, and that there is elements of holiness and beauty within that. I think helps bring us to that ability to see God in that way. And to want to be in the presence of God, right? Because I think if the presence is like I have to show up and be happy with my situation, I don't want to spend as much time with God, right? But if I can be my authentic self and know that God is listening to that and God receives that and will guide me through that, that shifts my desire to then want to be in the presence of God that, we pastors always talk about, like that's really, what am I doing in that presence? I think shifts how we see that and what we want.
That's good.
Yeah. I like, I agree with everything so far. And
so far.
Yeah, because I'm about to speak, so I mean, Mike, anything. No, but I feel like he does something very important. The author he speaks all the stuff that the wicked are doing and how it's wrong, but at the same time, I like how he describes their heart in verse 7. From their callous hearts comes iniquity. And I like it because he doesn't describe it in a definitive, like, this is the way it is, there's no changing it. It's not like, and obviously by then they already had like the whole experience with like Pharaoh a few hundred or thousand years ago. And how it says that, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, like you think of a rock, right? And here it just says, their hearts are calloused, they have calluses. And the thing about calluses, and I know for sure because, like I mentioned a billion times, I did landscaping when I was younger. And you use a shovel a lot and the rake and all that stuff, and so you build calluses. And it's been a couple of years that since I do landscaping, like at least like maybe 5, or I would say like 5 years, and I have 0 calluses in my hands. And I think that's really particular, and that's something that is valuable in the way that he humanizes that who he considers to be the enemy. That he says in describing their hearts, and also what Israel considers to be the most important part of like the being, right? He says, "Oh, the law of God will be written in your heart as well," right? And all these other things in your hands. And when I look at this, I just feel like, man, he's still hopeful for the people that are the oppressing and speaking malice and all this stuff. And he's saying, hey, their hearts are calloused, and over time they can change, they can heal, and they can become, real hearts of like, I guess smooth flesh. I don't know what the callus is.
Right.
But I really like that because I like being able to, I guess, argue on behalf of who you feel is the oppressor or enemy allows you to also be able to see the value of what God is doing in your own particular life. Because if it wasn't for God who's keeping him close, his heart would most likely be calloused as well. He says it himself, I would have slipped, I almost slipped. So I really like the way that he describes their hearts, because we're all prone to that, but being able to see someone and say, no, there's a way back, there's still hope, I think is key to for us being able to forgive, and for us to be able to not feel all that pressure and guilt of comparing ourselves to them. Keep moving forward.
Oh, that's a beautiful observation, man. I didn't catch that. The callous hearts, and I guess that goes to that perspective, right? Of just not only does God change your perspective or view when you come near him, and he gives you, a new heart. Not only is it a change of perspective of your situation, but also the change of perspective of those causing you to be in that situation or bringing that evil upon you, which is, I think, a powerful thing, right? To be able to turn around and, as he, the countercultural things that is so hard to do, like he says, love your neighbors, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who harm you, and pray for those who persecute you and use you. And there's no way we would do that in our own strength, right? I mean, we can maybe for a little bit do it, but there's a point where you're like, I can't. No, this is where I draw the line. And it's only through God's power and His grace and His love that we're able to turn around and do that, and then really change the world in that way. But no, that's beautiful. Callous hearts with the desire for them to be changed. Man. Nice Psalms. Those are good Psalms. Good Psalms. Heavy with a lot of questions, not a lot of resolution, and the things that we want the resolution to be in. But still some things. So big takeaway. Is that your big takeaway, Brian, about the callous hearts?
No, I think my big takeaway, at least what spoke out to me the most, is, I'm very prone to be arrogant about where I stand with God versus how I think others stand with Him. And if anything, the Psalm kind of brings out the fact that I have to be reminded of the truth that at the end of the day, the reason I'm sharing God's glory has nothing to do with how good of a Christian I've been or how often I come to church or whatever. I think at the end of the day, it has to do with, He strapped me, to His waist. And that's the reason I'm there right now. It's not that, He gave me His, I think of the imagery, right, of the ox, yoke, and all that stuff. And I think of that because it's not even like I'm not even pushing like that. He's the whole thing, and I'm just like there, like just strapped in next to him, and he's carrying the whole thing. And so I don't know. That's how I view it, and I think that's my big
imagery.
Fact of hey man, like take a hard look at yourself. Like you really think you got here on your own? You really think you got here because no one pushed for you to be here. Why are you really where you are?
Right.
Yeah, man. God has been there the entire time, and He's kind of pulled me through it all. And it had nothing to do with how devoted I thought I was being, or my lack of emotion, or how guilty or shameful I was feeling. It just had everything to do with
God. That's good.
What He did. So, yeah, that's my takeaway. The arrogance portion. For me, I think it's just the highlighting the tension, right? Where you see it from the first two verses. Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. So He knows that as a fact, right? I know God is good. I've seen it in my past. I've seen the history of the people of Israel, how He took us out of Egypt. I get it. But He says, as for me, that almost didn't feel like a reality, right? And so just that it's okay to live in that tension. But in that tension, I guess the most important thing is like, okay, you got to realize there's a tension, and there's going to be times where your faith journey and the promises of God don't line up with where you think you are, right? And you're like, how does this fit? And so I think the question is, what do you do with that tension, right? So for many of them, we would probably slip and say, I'm done, I'm out of here. There really is no benefit in following God. Or for others, it could be, what He does is he seeks after God. He draws near, as we've been talking, and God is able to share with him a different perspective of the grand scheme of things, and a different perspective of himself and how he's arrogant, as you were saying, Brian, and then a different perspective of those that are causing harm and how they may have some unresolved issues in themselves that are causing all this here. So I think, Michael, my big takeaway is just that tension that we live in as Christians, and awaiting the final setting up of God's kingdom where everything is good and there's no pain and suffering and death and no more evil. What do we do with that tension? I think is the key for me, right? I like that because I know you mentioned that at the beginning. Maybe I just wasn't listening. But like I know that when you say when you repeated that the first two verses, surely God is Israel to us who are pure in heart. But as for me, in other words, He's looking at Himself and He describes Himself not to be pure in heart from the very beginning.
Right.
Even though later He says, "Oh, I've done all this and I've been good and I've, whatever, bathed or washed my hands in innocence." I don't know what the heck He says. And so it's like, so he knows, he affirms the fact that he's not pure in heart because of what he does or doesn't do. So yeah, I like what you just mentioned there, Sela.
Yeah, man, surely God.
Yeah, and just tagging on to that, for mine, when it comes to the, just this idea of perspective, right? And and the difference between what the result can be when we have a perspective, right? So his perspective initially is pointed at people, and it leads him to falling off, like almost kind of being on this ledge, about to fall off. And then when his perspective shifts, verse 26, and I feel like verse 26 is a famous verse. I can't remember where I read it. Yeah. Just that my flesh and heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. That's what my version says. And knowing that there are, like, when he's judging based on these standards of other people or these things, like, there's going to be a point where he doesn't measure up, right? We don't measure up. But realizing that, with God, there's always this strength, there's always this sort of constancy that exists with God that doesn't exist with us. And that's a lesson for me, to know that at a certain point I'm going to look at somebody and feel like, oh, I'm doing good for myself, or I'm not there, but I'm never going to be where I want to be, right? Unless I'm in that space with God. And I think getting there is really the goal, and that's where true beauty is. That's where and just that beauty in the perspective. And I think that reframes how we understand the power of God per se, because I think we tie it to sort of to gain that is still reflective in things that we want to reflect it in. Like, if I follow God, then I'm going to become the greatest whatever on earth, which will then portray me as better than somebody else, right? And even when that, you see as he's going through this text, like he's condemning the people that he views as better than him, but at the same time wishing he was them. In that same way. And I think he realizes that even in the midst of, he's catching that, and he realizes, in the end, like, all that really matters is God is my portion. And I think that is the shift, man, that I wrestle with. And I think, a lot of us do is that tension, in the perspective that we need in order to see it differently.
Right.
I like that. Yeah. Cause it's none of this is like, kind of like when we work on sermons, right? The final product eventually is really fine tuned. But if people were to see us like on the early stages of it, right? Whatever it is, I know sometimes I share some comments with Chantal, and she's like, I don't get how that connects, but you know what I'm saying? Like, and it's not until you work it out and you explain the whole context that it's like, oh, so it's interesting because I think that's kind of how that's the
problem there, bro.
It's me. But I think it's interesting because I think sometimes it's, like this psalm's like that, right? Where it's like, it's not a result. It's not like the final product, right? He's literally, as he's writing, I feel like I can just see him like, but you know what? As for me, my foot. And you know what? Why am I wiping my, why am I cleaning my hand? Why? And it's like, you know what? I am also ignorant, and I'm literally a boot. So as he's writing it, he's like literally working through it. And I think it's a beautiful thing to see that it's not a finished product,
Yeah. And there's beauty in that, because I think we always we sort of glorify and
the end product,
deify the end product, right? Oh man, I've arrived, right? And that's when I'm there, and we hate this sort of journey there,
right?
Yeah,
that's kind of that was the line we had from last week. Don't rush the journey or the process, right? You got to really
the power of journaling, right?
Yeah, journaling or journeying?
Journaling.
Journaling.
Journaling, yeah.
Journaling. There you go. That's what I was looking for.
How's your journaling?
Yeah.
Journaling.
You gotta write a book.
Oh man, my
journaling.
Journaling.
Oh, that's good. That's the word. That's the word. So, journaling through. So we encourage you, journaling. How would you spell it?
Journal.
It's like this journaling.
Yeah.
Or
basically.
Journal. Or like that. Journaling.
It's the extra syllable on that next one, yeah.
Or maybe
journaling.
N-I-E-L-Y.
Yeah, we need like someone to walk us through the correct, like English, the endings.
L-Y.
Like this? Journaling? What you gotta do is just to make it not good, you just gotta do the let's see if I can.
So much suspense right now.
Yeah.
Journaling.
We have to fill in the hour.
Yeah. Oh, we can do this thing.
Journaling. Oh, it's a thing. I'm looking it up.
Journaling.
And it's just journey, and then ling. Oh.
It makes it look legit when you put like accents on.
It just looks like that's how you say journaling in Copenhagen or something.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Denmark.
Most people just spell it as journey and then ling at the end.
Like
that. There you go.
Oh man.
Let's
so
just
there you go.
Change the name from Bible and Brekkie to that.
If someone can pronounce this, Brian will take you out to eat in Miami. All right, now we'll get you Uber Eats. Oh man, well, thank you guys for joining us on Bible Brekkie and reading Psalm 73. Even though we crashed at the end there into journaling, but continue living that tension, seek and draw near to God, and continuing that journey. So be blessed. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you all next time.